I think
this
that
morning? Tell me your inner feelings.
I don't know what that hot pile of shit that I just watched this morning was. This massive dumpster fire of feces that filled my apartment with a just disgusting smell, and I am playing this on my laptop apparently at the same time. That's how fucking on edge I am after watching
he's
this
triggered.
goddamn mess.
Can you hear this? Ocean
I am
triggered.
so fucking triggered after watching this. This is Josh Brister's historical revisionism extravaganza. I was just like as fucking enraged.
Yeah, okay, we got a lot to go over here. What was your biggest takeaway from it, though? I mean, what do you think they were actually trying to argue? And what the hell do you think Josh was trying to?
So Josh is. Like, I've got a history with Josh, just so that people in the fucking live chat are perfectly aware of this. I've had a few arguments with him years ago, where I noticed about. It took me about probably 30 minutes or so of talking to him to figure out that he's just taking an approach from an incredibly biased historical revisionist standpoint, which has been fed to him by his Liberty University education. And which I don't know if you guys knew that that is a product of Liberty U that you are dealing with.
Oh, he said is that his alma mater? I mean, Liberty U is an accredited university. It's not like
it is,
but it's very biased.
Accredited university, but it is so slanted.
Oh,
and it is like the fact that he managed to escape that university with a history degree and is managing to still say the things that he's saying is just fucking abysmal. Like,
you think he got all the history wrong?
It's okay. So this isn't the first conversation that I've had with him, but what you saw was similar to stuff that he said in the past. What he's said in the past essentially boils down to European Protestant work ethic supremacy. That he holds that the success of Europe in history is due to Christianity completely.
That's absurd.
Fuck Rome.
Yeah,
that's absurd. And Greek. What about? I was going to say, what about Greeks? The Romans.
Everything else.
Too.
It's like, fuck. Like, I don't know. There's a
pagans,
whole lot of
pagan
issues.
Influence.
It's
there's a
the problem is that he also celebrates Aristotelian thought, which is from ancient Greece.
Exactly. That's true.
And then beyond that, he doesn't seem to recognize that the center of power swung across the world like a fucking pendulum. There were points where China was miles ahead of Europe. There were points where Persia was miles ahead of Europe. And there were points where Persia was miles ahead of Europe post-Christianity. So he's not going to... It's Christianity came in at the height of Rome, or not necessarily the height of Rome, but as Rome was in decline, and then Rome collapsed. And we spent, Christianity spent much of its formative years in the destitute of Europe's collapse.
Yeah, and I think you're right, but here's the thing.
Barring the Byzantine Empire, which Christianity did quite well in, but when you look at like what happened in Persia, a lot of advancements came out of Persia at that point in time when Christianity should have been, like, according to his revisionist view of history, Europe should have been flourishing when it was in destitute.
Well, let me ask you, let's say you granted him every premise that he made. You granted him everything arguendo. How does that lend any credence to the argument at hand?
Okay, so one of the you guys, I liked what you were doing, Steve, as far as calling him out, but I wish you had gone a little bit further. I understand that you were like being a moderator, kind of, but Kyle.
That's what I have this channel for. I can go as far as I want on this channel.
Like I identified with Kyle, but.
Yeah, no.
Kyle got mad.
I wish him luck in his weed smoking adventure that he's having right now. Because that guy is like he's on edge. But the question with slavery, there's a whole host of problems. First, the relationship with communism and atheism that they're trying to pitch is fucked when it comes down to history. It's like, but we can get into that in a second. But when the conversation on slavery, this idea of progressive revelation and preparing humanity for something as simple as don't own people is ridiculous. Like, it would have been so much fucking simpler at the time to just say, hey, don't fucking own people, especially since with the whole like Egypt narrative. You think it would have been pretty easy to be like, hey, you guys are once slaves, you didn't like that, maybe you shouldn't do it
You
to
think, right?
neighboring civilizations. But no, there's like a justification there that's somewhere rooted in, we follow the greatest god nobody else does, so we can justify this by owning slaves. That's more or less the narrative.
Yeah, no, I agree
It
with
comes
you.
from that.
And SJ's here, so maybe she can kind of chime in, because watching this unfold on Twitter, because you got to admit, I love my Twitter fires. Come on, let's admit it. I love my Twitter dumpster fires.
This hangout
That was a great
Steve
dumpster fire.
McRae dumpster fire on video. SJ, I love you to death. You chose the wrong ally. This guy is terrible.
But I feel proud when somebody like has a good dumpster fire. They've learned a lot how to have a really good dumpster fire, and that's what it was. Otherwise, there's who's Katie? You got a background noise.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, Katie.
Hi, guys.
We'll get you in just 1 second.
I'll put my mute.
Okay, you're fine. But SJ, so I felt bad for you, SJ. I honestly did. I know you brought this guy to help you out. I don't think he did anything to help your argument. I don't think that he lended any kind of real insight to anything.
It was a ball and chain and a crutch.
And it just kind of derailed something. Now, if the topic was something else, would have been great. Maybe I'm happy to engage with him on any of the philosophical stuff that he was talking about, but it just had nothing to do with the dumpster fire you were having with frustrated atheists, and that's kind of what I wanted to get into.
I don't know how we started. I'm still trying to think about how exactly we got sidetracked, because we were talking about communism and capitalism and all this stuff that I find extremely interesting. And then suddenly next thing we know, and I don't even remember how it happened, we're over in slavery. And I thought,
I agree with you.
How the hell do we get to that?
Someone just has to say slavery once, and it becomes, people care about that a little bit. And so it becomes an issue.
A lot.
Like, yeah, it once someone gets their teeth sunk into somebody that's actually going to hold the position, that it's going to start defending biblical slavery, it gets to be a mess, and you're dealing with a panel of 3 people that are against Christianity. So it's gonna happen. They're gonna leap on that. That's just the dynamic that's at play.
I know, but I don't even know. I honestly am going to have to go back and listen to this to see exactly how we evolved that way, because I don't want that to happen again. Like,
yeah, I didn't tune in until after it already happened.
I mean, I spent all this time coming up with my little and we never got to talk about most of the things. I don't know.
That's why I said I felt bad that it was kind of derailing from the conversation I thought it was going to be had.
If Josh had been like, you know what, we can, with the slavery thing is an interesting conversation, let's go back to communism, I think nobody would have complained. One of the problems is that he kept defending it in a way that was absolutely embarrassing, and it's incredibly hard not to jump on somebody that's doing that.
Yeah, I happen to agree with you.
Yeah,
I got a special for you guys in here in a few minutes, so just FYI. I got something special for you all.
Who's all on here? I don't recognize everybody.
Nobody of any importance.
Oh, wow.
I'm kidding. No, we got more people coming in. So, but for those who don't know the people on here, why don't you take 5 seconds to say hi and who you are? Because I don't know you people either. No, I'm just kidding. Start with Athena.
I mean, I know Ocean.
You don't know Athena. I don't think you know Katie. Do you know Katie? I don't know.
I know you too, SJ.
Okay, well, I mean, somebody told me to. Well, I've been part of this community for like over a year. There's a funny story of how I met Steve. If you want to tell the story, really.
Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay. Well, okay. So after I was watching the second debate, Steve hosted between King Crocoduck and everybody's favorite punching bag, Kent Hovind. I messaged him on Twitter and sent him a link to my friend's live stream, and after a while I start talking, and then he's like, because my friend was high, he was hosting, and Steve was like, "How high are you?" And I said, "I'm not high. I just stutter." And he's like,
he's like, "I'm not high. I just have a stuttering problem." And I was like, "Oh man, I feel bad."
Oh, hold on. I got somebody who said that they know how we got to slavery. So
okay, I think everybody knows who Ocean is. Everybody knows who Frustrated is. People may not know Ned though. Ned is one of the old-time debaters that I know, that we go way back. In fact, one of the best debates I've ever seen was him debating true empiricism on one of the claims that he made, and I was involved in that one, and it was spectacular.
Well, thank you, Steve. And yeah, like Steve said, I'm old guard. I've been around almost 10 years now for YouTube. Back in the day, I did quite a bit more than I do now. I've kind of fallen away for the last 2 or 3 years. But I guess like Steve was saying, what I like to do more than anything is debate. I've got what I consider to be some original arguments posted on my channel that I'd love to discuss. And I guess if I have a specialty, if you want to call it that, maybe morality would probably be my strong suit. I am an atheist, by the way.
And I love the fact, see, Ned and I have something that I don't see very often. We actually will try to come up with our own arguments. We actually want to see if our arguments hold water. We'll throw them out there and have people throw, darts at them and try to have defeaters for these arguments. And I think that, one, it shows that you're willing to, put yourself out there. But I don't see a lot of people doing that for some reason. They're always going to parrot somebody else's argument, which is fine. I mean, we run all kinds of arguments, and some people can do a better job at others. But I like the fact that Ned will actually come up with his own arguments, and that's not easy to do.
Well, and to me, that's the fun part. It's kind of like a puzzle. Oh, and by the way, I don't know if I'd mentioned, but my YouTube channel is Negation of P. Ned Purdom is, I guess, what I'm kind of starting to gravitate toward, just because it's easier than saying negation every time.
Hey, what do you do when people say there's a defeater for your argument, but they don't understand the argument even begin to have a defeater for it, and you just kind of laugh at them. You're like, you're not even understanding any of this, and you think you have a defeater. It's comical. It's like they just want to pat them on the head and go, okay, go play in the sandbox with the other special children.
Well, and the problem with that is that it seems like I run into that more than anything else. And I try to go out of my way to oversimplify the arguments to make sure that there is no ambiguity and we can get on the same page. But probably the best example of that was I was on with Matt Slick. He specifically asked me on to discuss one of my arguments, and he literally could not get past the word if, the IF. And it was just, the problem is, I think before he got on, he didn't understand it. And then once he started to understand it, he was trying to dance around as much as he could, so he didn't have to address it because he didn't have a defeater.
Well, you saw when I was engaging with Matt on the tag argument, right? I mean,
oh yeah.
So I mean, he kind of did the same thing. By the way, I'm trying to arrange something with Tag. I would love to have a discussion with Tag, about that with Matt again, maybe with Alex Malpass and Dave S. But I do have somebody special for you here, Ned. You asked me to. Ned, as I said, Ned has his own arguments, and he likes to test them out, and he wants the best and the most strongest argument to, the interlocutors to go against. So I brought somebody in for you. You might know him as Sidetracked Bruggencate. Does that name ring a bell to you, Ned?
I do, absolutely. Mr. Bruggencate, how are you doing?
There you go. Ned Cy Ned.
Oh, hey, Cy.
Do we want to spend a little time on the communism thing before we jump into?
Not really.
No, okay.
Not really.
I was kind of interested in what Esther had to say about that, because I think I have agreements, but I would love to talk about it at some point.
And I definitely don't want to be the one to derail the entire argument. So, and it looks like Cy dropped off.
He's got to fix his mic anyways. He has issues with Hangouts.
Hey, Ned, can you put a link to your website or anything somewhere where I can see it, like maybe in the chat or somewhere?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks. I'll do that, SJ.
So we're gonna wrap. We're gonna. Cy, hang tight. We're gonna finish this with the whole debate that they had on Non Sequitur a little while ago about communism and atheism. You might be interested in. It was kind of derailed, but fun, I guess. But SJ, if you want to kind of continue on that line.
I think what I wanted to spend some time on was just talking about the. I basically support capitalism, and I think capitalism is a great system. And I think that a lot of atheists even support capitalism, like you, Steve. And I think Kyle does too.
Oh yeah, I'm a capitalist. Sure.
I think capitalism is a really good system. Private ownership. One thing that I didn't get to say today that I wanted to say is one of the reasons why I support it over communism is because communism goes completely against our psychology. I mean, we're all made where we want to work hard and we want to be rewarded. So communism is not like that. You know, you're rewarding basically by needs, not by what people contribute. So it's completely flawed at its basic core. So so I did want to say that, and that's one unifying point that we can all agree with.
I would kind of disagree.
I think he'd be the only one arguing that there might be benefits to communism. I don't know.
I think that the thing is whenever you look at the basic level of communism, that the whole entire working together to benefit the entire community is good. I don't think that it's been practiced in that manner, nor would it probably ever be. But I do think that basic common outline itself is a good quality to have within a society. Is that everyone works for the goodness and the well-being of the entire group, instead of just fuck you, I'm gonna do my own thing type of thing, if you will.
But I'm only going to concede that on a small scale, communism work in a very, very small society, right? But I do believe in private and public ownership of land. I do believe that capitalism, as far as free market, definitely in a free market. But I don't think anybody's advocating a communist position. This is why when you guys were talking on Twitter, relating communism to atheism, the only relationship is that is in most communist states, they tend to be atheistic. But there's such a huge difference between a state atheist and an atheist. I mean, they're just irreconcilably different from each other, because one is just saying about the existential nature of God, but the other one's an entire social political position, right? I mean, they're just it's fallacy of division to say that.
I think it's important to clarify before necessarily going in that direction. SJ, are you holding that atheism entails communism, or that communism entails atheism?
That's what I asked.
Which direction are you going?
No, what I was trying to say was that the people who have practiced communism have been atheists. That was my basic claim. And I also claim that communism in and of itself, if it's formed from Marxism, Marx was his item 22 in the Communist Manifesto made it very explicit on atheism. So the two are related, they're correlated, but it's certainly, there are many atheists who are not communists. So you can't say that atheism.
Well, I
clarify that for a second. That one, not all communists wind up being we have historical examples of people practicing communism that aren't atheist, but the argument does get interesting when you note that a lot of the large-scale mass-killing examples of communism are necessarily atheist. Like all of them are. So that's where the conversation gets interesting, I think, because there's a discussion to be had there about what happens when you get, people talk about that religion causes mass killing and they blame religion for all this stuff, but we can also see that it happens with communism and even on a larger scale. So that's where, to me, there's an interesting conversation to be had. Would you agree with that, or?
Ocean, before you continue, though, I would say that I wouldn't say that all of the mass killings were due to the leaders being atheistic.
No, I wouldn't say that either. But I am noticed that the correlate in history can be noted, and that's where I'm saying that the conversation gets interesting.
And that's what I was trying to say. It was a correlation. So we have the examples: Mao in China, Stalin, Lenin. Got examples like that.
But what's the actual argument, though? Because it's like saying, well, you have a theocracy, so for a theocracy, we tend to find people that have a theist position in charge. That's just, it's so what? I mean, I don't see what the actual argument is being
something
had.
else that's usually said, Steve. So a lot of times when I see it get brought up, and when I bring it up, for example, is when somebody is making the claim that religion in and of itself is the main cause throughout history of things like genocide, mass killing, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think that that's demonstrably not the case in history. That a lot of the, in fact, largest mass killings in history, and then some of the nastiest ones, are not religiously motivated. And that's when communism gets brought up. is that when you get into tens of millions of people being killed, it's not over a religious issue; it's over something else.
Yeah, and I think that's the point to be taken away, though. I mean, look at whether these are religious issues or not. I think that the reason Frustrated Atheist and a lot of people were kind of dogging on SJ's comments is that, and I think she's trying to lay this narrative from appeal to emotion that, oh, communism is bad and communism will sometimes entail atheism, therefore atheism is bad. And I see that's kind of the direction.
I've seen people make that argument.
Yeah,
and it's a bad argument.
Yeah, but I don't know if SJ was actually trying to do that intentionally. But even inadvertently, even non-intentionally, that's what I think the people were getting upset about, because they're seeing this narrative that, oh, communism is bad, and if you're associating communism with atheism, then you're saying some kind of transitivity that atheism is also bad. And if that was the argument, that's just, I think, a crappy argument.
I see. That's one reason why I don't like. I've been noticing lately that I've had some Twitter. I've had a lot of clickbait on Twitter. It's my own fault. You know, I put something out there, and the next thing I know, literally 300 people comment on it.
There's nothing wrong with that. No, look at
that's partially my fault.
I'm not going to fault you for clickbait Twitter stuff. I'm not going to fault you for that.
I'm not trying to do that, though. So I say something like communism equates to atheism. And the next thing I know, I've got...
Have you read Sci 10 stuff? Have you read Sci 10 stuff?
Yeah, Sci and I
master. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, I decided I didn't want to do clickbait anymore, and because I had some clickbait on YouTube, and that attracted Aaron Ra, and then all of his followers started going after me and commenting. And I've got this one video, something like, I forgot what it's called, 11 reasons why, or 11 questions atheists can't answer, and
which everybody answered.
Yes, so it became clickbait. I don't want that to happen again. I have to figure out how I can avoid clickbait. I'm not trying to do that.
But then you get on Non Sequitur show and people yell at you. It's great.
Nobody yelled at her at all. SJ, did anybody yell at you at all today?
I think I was speaking in all caps.
You were yelling at everybody. Yeah, you were going.
Yeah, I was, but I don't think I was yelling at SJ. I was more angry at Josh.
I don't think anybody was.
I don't think.
It's insulting that Josh is absconded with a degree from in history. So
I would have liked to talk to him more about some philosophical stuff. But anyways, I know people are limited on time, so can Ned real quick run his gnome argument? I don't know how long
go ahead, Ned.
I'm really kind of interested in it because his gnome argument has been sussed out for how long now, and I want to see if he's shored up some of the problems with it that may have been before. And by the way, Brant, welcome. By the way.
Oh, thank you.
I wasn't ignoring you. So and General Han Solo wasn't ignoring you either.
Cool.
So, so Sai and Ned, why don't you guys take about 15, 20 minutes maybe, or whatever it takes. I'll sit back and I'm happy to listen to him run this argument and see if Sai can kind of dismantle it.
Okay, well, the gnome argument is specifically on morality, and I mean we can go that. I'd love to hear Sai's take on it. That would be wonderful as well. But I also, the other thing, if Sai had time, again, not today. If we don't have time, I don't want to dominate the show by any means. But I'd love to get into, some of the problems I find with at least Sai's version, which I won't get into all the background, but basically Sai's version of the precept argument, which is a side issue. But again, if you want to go directly to gnome, we can go there. I'm happy to go either way. What would you rather do?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of your argument that you want to kind of practice to see how well it flies, right?
Well, I mean, the precept is actually my latest. I hadn't published anything on it at all. But again, yeah, it's
up to you. I mean, I brought him in here for you.
Since
he's a heavy hitter.
That's what I'm saying. Since Sai's a lot.
I'm not going to front. He's not easy to go against.
Well, I know that's what I'm saying.
I can do it because I'm good, but I'm kidding.
well, since Sai was, so nice to come on. I mean, I don't want to. I kind of like him to choose. Would you rather talk about the precept, Sai, or would you rather talk about morality?
I'm easy. I was watching the Senate arguments just now when Steve messaged me, so that was kind of entertaining.
What's going on over there?
It's just people spouting their stuff from their respective sides, and
it's such a cluster over there.
Yeah, well, thankfully I'm Canadian, so I don't have that much involvement with it, but I have found it interesting. Yet? No, I think they said between 3 and 5. I know that one senator is at his daughter's wedding, and he said he was going to fly back for it, but they don't know whether that's necessary or not.
I think Murkowski is just voting present because of that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, as far as the moral argument goes, I mean, all of you know that I'm a presuppositionalist, and I would say that even to argue about morality, you're assuming things that I would say you cannot justify without God. That's why I tend not to start with people with a moral argument. I mean, I will go and discuss casually with a person an argument about morality, but really, I would never debate. I would never do a debate on whether God is necessary for morality, because then I would be conceding a lot of things that I would say that God is necessary for, like just the very ability to debate. So, I mean, if he wants to run the moral argument past me, I'd be willing to listen to it. But I think it might be more productive to talk about presuppositionalism.
Can I ask? Okay. Can I ask if Ned is Ned a moral relativist, or are you a moral objective?
Oh, that's tough. I'm I guess undecided. I like moral relativism, but I'm also, and I even came out on this, and Saka lost his mind when I said this earlier this year, that I do tend to have moral realist leanings. So
you triggered Saka on that, I'm sure.
Oh, I did. He lost his mind.
Dude, when I tell people I got no problem with objective morality, they're like, Steve, are you insane? I'm like, I don't. Yeah, so it's weird when people think that for some reason, and you'll have to just think the same, exactly the same. So people don't.
Right. And just so, I guess for SJ and Cy also, this argument is not arguing against God in any way. In fact, it mandates that you believe not only in God, but you also have to believe in the infallibility of the Bible. I mean, it has to be dead on 100%. So taking into those, all we do is we, I guess, investigate where that leads. And the conclusions, I'll put it this way, tend to be uncomfortable for most people. And my question when it comes to this argument is how my conclusions are flawed. Where am I missing in any way, shape, or form a step along the way that would negate anything that I have posited as being a logical conclusion to this?
I find that to be fascinating. First of all, hi, SJ, and hello, and Ned, and everybody else. I did not give my proper greetings, but I think that you will find that SJ and I will probably give you different answers on that if you stick with, and I don't want to be insulting to SJ, it's just that I think that we have a different take. But I think that if you are consistent with what Scripture says, then I will agree with everything that you say. The problem is people who, I imagine you profess atheism. People who profess atheism tend to say what they think the Bible says and then profess that. However, as a Christian, and I'm sure SJ will see that, but she might have a different take on the different covenants and which laws still apply. But I'm a theonomist. And I believe there's two views. There's theonomy and there's autonomy, and it's either God's law or man's law. And I'm not an autonomist. I believe in theonomy. And I know that I had a lot of complaints when people said, "What's the best form of government? Is it democracy?" I say, no. The best form of government is theocracy, Christian theocracy. People freak out about that, but somebody's going to make the laws. It's either going to be man or it's going to be God. So if you have laws that are consistent with Scripture, that have not been abrogated by Christ, that have not been fulfilled and done away with by Christ, then I say yes, they apply.
Does that
well, I mean,
laws
that,
as well?
that kind of sounds. I mean, inside again, I'm really appreciative you came on, and again, I'd love a chance to talk to you more later on. I don't want to dominate this, but for whatever reason, it sounds like everybody's gravitating toward morality. So if you don't have a problem with that,
I'll tell you what, I would love the moral discussion. But let's do this, and because I want to involve SJ a little bit as well, because she likes this topic. I will kind of maybe be more of an arbitrator, because I think what happens when we talk about morality is everybody starts using terms and they all use them differently, and it bugs the crap out of me, because if people don't have the same page of what these terms mean in the moral context, then they get very confusing very quickly, and the live feed just kind of goes, what the hell are they all talking about? So as long as you guys are on the same page when it comes to moral context, and by the way, I agree with Cy on this one. Him and SJ would give you guys different. I know both their positions, kind of thing on this. They would not agree on certain things when it comes to morality. So I would like to hear both of them, but I could kind of sit back and kind of be not a moderator, but just a mediator, facilitator. I don't mind doing that if you guys don't care.
That's fine with me.
Yeah, like the thing is, I fully, for me, there's a difference between debate mode and discussion mode.
I like discussion mode.
Yeah, I'm fine.
You and me both.
Yeah. This is
I am
definitely
so
discussion.
on that page.
Yeah. I mean, I like a good discussion. So everybody in here right now be basically on the same page on that. We don't want some debate. We want people to talk and just kind of suss things out. And I will still man anybody. I'll give you the best.
I'd say also decide that there's a third a third area which is like dumpster fire mode.
Like this morning.
It's like, all right, I'm dealing with a goddamn fool.
Well, I would appreciate that you not blaspheme while I'm on here, because then it will turn into a dumpster fire.
Oh no,
he's a pagan. Okay, so Ned, you want to kind of like start us off?
So okay, and first thing, side, just since you don't really know me, I honestly want to be wrong, and I know that sounds like I'm being, I honestly do. My belief is that the only way that we really learn or have a chance to learn is when we are erroneous or at least unaware of facts that are out there. And if we're brave enough and honest enough to take that new knowledge that we were made aware of, that's when we grow as human beings. If I'm right on all of this stuff, I didn't get anything. And trust me, like I said, I've been doing some form of counter apologetics for well over 25 years. I went to Oral Roberts University. I've been through the deal. My days of caring about people knowing my name and who I am are way past. So I'm 100% into, is what I believe to be true correct? And if it's not, I want to know it's wrong. So that's what I'm here to find out. I'm not here to try to win. That's the ridiculous deal in my opinion.
So just to be clear, you are Negation of E online. Is that your handle?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen a lot of your stuff over the years.
Infamous. So. I know. I'm surprised a lot of people don't know who he is. I mean, he's been around a long time. He's way back.
I don't recall if you've been fair or kind to me, but for me, that's all water.
I can tell right now he's been kind, because
that's water under the bridge for me.
Negation is a good guy. He's not an aggressive individual, so I'm going to vouch for him. I've never seen him be bad to anybody.
I would hope in one of my, I guess, less restrained moments, I wouldn't have ranted on you, because that hasn't happened very often. So, but that's flattering. I'm glad you at least somewhat are aware of who I am. But
absolutely.
All right. All right.
I think this is the difference between. That's where I like Ned's point of view, is because he recognizes the difference between belief and knowledge.
Exactly.
Right.
Okay.
But belief is a component of knowledge, clearly.
I would say, we can get into that, but I would say contingent on perceived knowledge anyway. But anyway, you just want to jump into it? I just got a couple of, and I guess if we're going to include SJ in this, I guess we'll kind of have to make it for lack of a better term, a three-way into these questions, but they're not hard, and they're not.
Better not talk like that, or you'll never be a Supreme Court justice.
I thought you had to talk that way.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought that was a prerequisite.
Hey, I got to let you know something. I like beer.
I'm Presbyterian, but I never acquired that taste.
I'm kidding. I actually don't like beer, but I think it's funny that he said that.
More than one, like 10,000 times.
It's not that he just said it. He said it so many times. It's just like, I like beer. I enjoy drinking beer. Yeah, I like beer.
I think it tastes like pee, and no, I do not have first-hand knowledge of that.
It reminds me of I like turtles. All right, go ahead. Jump into it, Ned. Come on.
Okay. All right. So for both of you guys, I'm assuming that the God you believe in is the one that's specifically described in Job, Revelation, Psalms. It's basically an omni-God, an unbounded omni-God. So timeless, spaceless, without bound. Would that be correct in that assumption?
I would clarify. I would say that he is bound by his nature, because there are things that God cannot do. So, but I think that you would agree with that definition.
Okay.
I mean, he cannot sin. God cannot lie. There's things he cannot. So he's bound by his nature. But as far as the rest goes, yes, I would agree with that.
Okay. SJ, you good with that?
Yeah. I think I just highlight that God is transcendent and immanent concurrently.
Okay, that helps a little. Also, I'm assuming that both of you believe that all of this that we're doing is because of God's will and God's plan. He does have a plan that will because of being omni and having those abilities, there's no choice. His plan must come to fruition, and that plan is the greatest of all goods. It will result in the greatest of all good because, like Cy alluded to, that's part of his nature, and that's all he can achieve.
Yeah, but neither SJ or myself are determinists. So I would not say there is no choice. I would say that our choices are ordained and they are free, but our wills are in bondage. Our choices are according to our natures. We cannot change our natures. And I think that, of course, since I'm of the Reformed persuasion, I would answer that differently than SJ would. And sometime I'm going to have to debate SJ on that topic. But I would say, no, we do have real choices. And SJ would agree with me on that. But I think that she would argue for libertarian free will. I think she's leaning towards Molinism, which I would say is unbiblical. But I would say, yes, we do have, I think we would both agree that we both would say that we do have choices. So to say that we don't, like neither of us are determinists. Right. I'm a compatibilist.
Just to clarify on that, do you believe that given even a libertarian free will, God is still aware of the choices that will be made?
Well, see, that's a problem because I would say there's no such thing as libertarian free will. And you actually put your finger on the problem with those who do agree with libertarian free will. Because if God is aware of the decisions you're going to make, the question is, how are you free to choose other than what God is aware of? So that might even be what you're alluding to. But I would say that's the problem with the people who argue for libertarian free will.
Okay, so, well, actually, I'm glad you went that way because that's what I was hoping.
No, I don't agree with that completely. He and I have different opinions, and he's right. I am leaning towards being a Molinist.
Oh, sorry. I'm not giving my opinion.
I got you.
I know. I just want to clarify. So I have a little bit different of an opinion on that. That's all.
Okay. Well,
yeah, no, you know what? We have
shots fired, guys. Shots fired.
We're gonna have to dive into that one day. I actually find Molinism interesting. It's kind of an interesting proposition, but that's a whole different topic for another day because that's a very in-depth topic.
Well, this will be interesting because I mean that it's not so much that it hinges on that fact, but at the same time it should make it a little more colorful. So to clarify from from your side, what you're saying is that even though we have free will, it is not unbounded, it's not libertarian, and God is aware of what choices we'll make even before He created us. And then. Go ahead, sorry.
I would argue against the term free will. Now, there are people who define free will as free choice. And so I would agree with how you're defining it. I would not call it free will, but I have no problem with people saying free will as long as they limit it. I would say that we have free choices and that our wills, according to Scripture, our wills are in bondage to our natures. But the way you describe free will, I'm willing to go with that.
No, I like that. That's a good way to put it. I like that. I like instead of going with the will. Anyway, I'll jump over to SJ. SJ, as far as you're concerned, you're almost on the other side of the fence as far as going at least Molinistic. Is God aware of those choices? I guess pre-creation, pre-everything, or is He reactionary in that He allows things to happen and then bases actions off of that?
No, see, there's a couple things I want to clarify or at least put out there. So I'll say that God, under a Molinist perspective, God knows what we will do in certain circumstances. He knows how we would act given certain choices, and He knows which position would best place us in this life to fulfill His will for us. But as far as God before creation knowing exactly what I will do today, He knows that because He's concurrently in our past, present, and future. So He knows the actions because He's not only in the present, but He's also concurrently in this form. That's what it means to be transcendent. He's concurrently in the past, present, future.
Okay. And I guess so we've got it to the point where we've kind of got free will on one side and on the other side got a lot more free will. But in either case, God's plan, God's will must be done. And that's His creation was, at least in part, to bring to fruition that plan and that event, whatever that'll be in the end. That greatest of all goods. Does that make sense?
I would say the difference between my position and SJ's position is that God ordains everything that comes to pass, some things through secondary means, but he ordains everything that comes to pass, whereas the Molinist, they say God plays with the cards he's dealt. And I think that's a weak God, and that's why I have problems with that position, because I would say it's not a biblical position. And I would argue, actually, that there is no freedom at all according to that position, as much as somebody would like to say, because if God even enacts the situation in which the most possible people are saved, he knows what you will do. And the question is, how are you free to do other than what God knows you will do? And that question is never answered. That question is always left out there. And I think that's when you start to see the problems with that position. So, I mean, of course, we're not debating that position right now, or we're not debating that topic right now. But I think that, unbelievers, they actually see the issues with that and they point them out. And I think they should be debated.
Okay. SJ, do you want to say anything, or are we good?
Well, the reason why God knows what we're going to do is because, again, he's concurrently in our past, present, future. So.
Right, but the thing is, since God knows what you're going to do in 5 minutes, are you free to do otherwise? That's the question.
He's in that time too, Si. He's actually seen my entire life lived out all the decisions I've made.
I think you're talking about two different things, though. General, you want to say something quickly? Maybe I can maybe suss this out, because there's a difference between Molinism and Compatibilism, and we're dealing with a Molinist and a Compatibilist, and they're two vastly different things.
Well, the problem is she would like to say that God sees the past, present, and future. Yeah, I get that. However, we are in time.
Yeah,
we are in time, and since we are in time, and God knows what we'll do because He's in the future, how are we free to do other than what God knows we will do? We are in time.
Yeah, the Molinist posits that God has a middle knowledge, that if He knows what you're going to do in situation Y and situation X, and if He wants this to occur, He's going to somehow manifest in some kind of modal ontological possible world, that's going to be the conditions that you are in to make such a decision. In which case, the decision's still free technically, but he's going to be using his middle knowledge to kind of put you in a world where you're going to make that choice because he knows it. But I agree with you, though, Si. I'm more of a compatibilist, even though I think there's some flaws there too. But you have to determine whether you want to take the position where things are determinate or indeterminate. And if you're a libertarian free will person, you automatically are taking a indeterminate position, and they're incompatible with each other in that ways, because a compatibilist is a deterministic position. Just involves free will too.
I think that. Oh, one second.
Yeah, go ahead, Ocean.
With the idea of God being in past, present, and future, and maybe the Christians can correct me on this, because I do not know how Christians deal with this idea, but it seems like that would mean that God, being separate from the universe, has created something that everything has already sort of happened from his perspective. That he sees how the present is moving through that which he's already created. And that, I think, would hold to a determinist position in Christianity.
It's hard determinism.
And yeah, so if he's in the past, present, and future, it seems that free will would be very difficult to reconcile. But I'm like, even from a Molinist position, it still seems to be that there's a determinist aspect. It's just like free will just becomes something that's
the problem with the Molinist position is that God sees what happens and he bases his will upon that. Exactly. Whereas we will say no, that God ordains all things, that nothing happens outside of his plan, and I think that would be the major difference between the views.
So, are you a determinist?
I'm a compatibilist.
That's a determinist position, though. So he is.
Well, that's fair. That's fair. Okay. I'm a theological determinist.
Exactly. Yeah, the theological determinist. Who's got the washing machine in the background? It sounds like.
Can I explore the intelligence of that real quick? Because I don't know if somebody else is going through that with.
Ocean, to be clear, real quick, the best explanation or the best analogy I've heard for the Mullis deal is it's more like an author, to where the author starts writing the book with an overall arching plan or idea. But due to how the characters develop internally throughout the story, there may be offshoots to that. It may change everything. And so in the same way that God is past, present, future, the author is past, present, future within the novel that they're constructing. That's
kind of, but from a writing perspective, I think that a lot of that has more to do with when you're the universe isn't created until the book is written, right? And from the perspective of you're creating while you're writing, but nothing is created until it's done, because things can change. The author can go back and be like, oh wait, this character doesn't make sense anymore. Go back into the past and change something that a character does, or name,
God,
even whatever.
And I know we're getting off on a side topic, but I think God has that capability as well. He could go back and change things prehistory, if you want to put it that way.
Right. I think that maybe in the creation process, possibly, but I think that God is done creating. According to Christianity.
Here, let me just interject for a minute, Ned. I really like your analogy, and I think there's flaws when it comes to my position. I've used that very analogy to describe compatibilism. But I think the difference between my position and the Molinist position is God wrote the book, and they would say God found the book.
Okay, that's interesting.
No, I would definitely not say God found the book.
No, they wouldn't say that, but it would be consistent with their position.
Let me think about that. That's
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you're also creating a deity that has the ability to go back in time and create itself.
There's an
and still be consistent with the theology.
There's an entailment that comes from this that it winds up going down another tangent, but that if you have a determinist framework that's not based in free will and Christianity, it seems to me that then responsibility of every action that's happened in the universe, because the determined nature or deterministic nature of the universe, then falls upon the creator, because that's the origin of everything that's happened. That things would not have happened cannot happen differently without.
Careful though, you're bordering on fatalism at that point though. If you're saying that they cannot be any different than they are, that's a type of fatalism.
In a determinist framework, I'm not sure what.
You're describing hard determinism as opposed to compatibilism, because we would say that God determines even our free choices, and that's where the mystery, that's where the paradox comes in.
Okay.
But we would say that we do have genuine free choices according to God's determination. I'm not a hard determinist, whereas
you're a soft determinist. Yeah.
Can you explain like how that
compatibilism is known as soft determinism? They're the same position.
That's fair. That's fair.
Hey, you guys, I need to run, so I'm just gonna have to say thank you so much for having me in here. Okay.
Thanks, Esther.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Kat.
See you, Esther.
But I think that Esther might be the only one that accepts libertarian free will, because I don't know many people that do.
It makes no sense according to an atheistic position either.
It doesn't make any sense from any position. I mean, to have libertarian free will, you literally have to be saying that you are making a choice with any non-outside interference or undue influence. I don't think that's even possible.
No.
Yeah, which I agree as well. I mean, there's got to be anyway. But okay, so if we're good with that, I think
you need that Apple random choice actuator app.
Go ahead,
okay, so I think we're on the same page. God's omni, God's all good. His plan is coming to fruition, and because of his nature, the plan must be all good. So I think we've got through that part of it.
Okay, you're on the same page there.
Yeah. So at that part, then I guess I usually just go ahead to kind of a thought experiment and get your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Before we continue though, let me just differentiate between all good and all loving, because people they don't like when I bring that up either. But God is all good, but he's not all loving. There are things that God hates.
No, I don't think.
I absolutely agree.
I don't think anybody's going to make that argument. Yeah. I mean,
that you're absolutely right on that.
Two different things, sure.
Okay. So anyway, I would. The thought experiment is a little graphic, but we're going to get there anyway. So why not start there? That's the way I look at it. So the thought experiment is envision you're in a room with a woman having a child, and she literally just gives birth. The baby has taken 2, 3, 5 breaths. I mean, it is brand new infant. Someone walks up, infects the child with a disease that will kill the child within the week. And when asked, why did you do that? Well, the father basically transgressed. The father did something that I do not approve of, and specifically told him not to. Therefore, I'm going to take the life of the child. Now, if a person did that, given the attributes of your God, given what we went through, would you consider, knowing what you know about your God, that to be part of God's will, against God's will, good, evil? Kind of suss that out a little bit if you could for me.
Yeah, sure. I would say that it was according to his will, his divine will, but I would say is according to his decretive will, not according to his prescriptive will. because God prescribes thou shalt not murder, but he decrees that some people murder through secondary means, through their own evil nature. So I would say that person is not God. So what they would be doing would be evil. Now God, he knows all things, because in Scripture we're also commanded to love our enemies. God does not love all his enemies in a salvific way. We are commanded to love our enemies. So the commands that God gives us, will differ for us when they involve our knowledge of the intent and of the soul of the other person. We don't know that, God does. So for God to invoke that upon generations, he is God. He can do that, but we can't. So I would say that's where the differentiation is in that scenario.
Okay. So, and again, you probably are aware that story mirrors 2 Samuel 2:10 through 18, where Uriah's wife was impregnated by David, and God himself comes down and strickens the baby with an illness, and the baby dies within a week, and all that. Right. So what you're saying is that action, that killing that child in that instance, because God did it, was not only good, but because it was by the hand of God, it had to be the absolute good. It was the best of all goods. Would right. That be correct?
Yeah, because I think we would also differentiate between killing and murder. Murder is that killing which is unlawful, and since God is the standard of law, God cannot murder. So any killing that God does is good, and it is righteous.
Okay. All right. So in that instance right there, we can at least suss out that if God did anything, we know that it would be good. And because everything that God decrees, everything that happens according to God's will, I think that we're getting to the point where it's very difficult to determine exactly where the line between a good and evil action would be. In other words, we're starting to erode morality to the point of non-existence. You see where I'm going there?
No, I wouldn't say that, because I would say, that's what we as Christians do. We do Bible studies. We look in Scripture to see, what God has decreed for us, what he's prescribed for us, and, his own nature, and why he does what he does. So, I have no problem knowing that I cannot kill somebody's child and knowing that God did. I have no problem making that differentiation.
Wait a second, Si, because you can kill a child. If God decrees it, if God, mandated you to kill a child, then, and we have examples of that, the Amalekites, we can go back through everything, where God specifically says, kill every living thing.
Right.
So it's not that you can't kill. There are conditions under which you can. Well,
I would say that there wouldn't. I would make that argument, because I would say that God's revelation is complete. It says in Hebrews chapter 1 that God reveals himself now through his Son, through his word. That's how he's revealed himself. And that kind of killing was done for a preservation of the Israelites. And I say that's not the case anymore. So I say God could not command that of me. Now, if somebody wants to say, well, through some miraculous event, he did command that of me, of course it would be good. But I just don't believe that can happen anymore.
Okay. And just to be clear, your interpretation of Revelation to come, and I mean Revelation as far as the final book of the New Testament, is God going to use any of his people or any of his believers to help fight in the Holy War? Is it going to be purely angelic? Kind of, because we know that there's going to be wars on earth during that time, according to that book. And I would assume that under the guidance of God, his holy warriors, whoever they may be, would in fact have to kill others.
Yeah, right. The thing is, eschatology, end times, is one thing that I have not studied. And I actually saw a debate between three people that held different eschatological views, and it was hosted by John Piper, and it's on YouTube. And I would call myself amillennial. I have strong leanings towards postmillennial, and I think if a postmillennialist sat me down, I would affirm that view. But these three people debated that topic, and they have more intelligence in their pinky finger than I'll ever had. They all made very good arguments, and I'm sorry, I just don't know. Revelation is a very difficult book. So I'm not saying I don't know how it's going to end, but my concern is for the lost. So I tell people, I don't know how it's going to end, but I just say be ready. But if you want to continue on your moral argument along that lines, I'm just saying I don't know how that's going to look. It's not something I've studied. It's not something I'm really interested in.
Can I ask a quick question real quick?
Sure.
My question is about I actually wrote it down. You guys are talking about good and evil and God being good and evil, and Ned brought up the example. And my understanding is that what is giving you the ability to make this judgment about God? Because you're judging God, all of God's actions as good. And then when someone judges some of these actions as evil, you said, well, you can't judge those actions because God is the standard by which you judge everything. But then wouldn't that also mean you couldn't judge God as good? Because you'd be judging your standard. And the retort that you've had for people who are judging God as being evil is that God is the standard. So wouldn't I be able to use that same argument against you to say, yes, well, if God's the standard, then you can't judge him as good?
Yeah, but the thing is, I don't judge God as good. I'm not his judge. God declares himself as good, and I believe it.
Can we ask real quick what the definition of good? And I hate getting into definitional things, but this is one time where good is critical. The whole problem with conceptualizing what is good, going back to Moore's argument and to avoid a naturalistic fallacy, is when we start talking about what is good. What is the good? What does it actually mean to be the good? I don't like the naturalistic fallacy. I mean, I don't think that we should. I don't think we should try to define good in terms of anemoia and what is beneficial to us, because I think that's a problem. But when you say God is good, what are you meaning by good there? Because it is important to this conversation. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that which comports with his nature and character and revelation.
Yeah. But just to be clear, that means that you can't judge any of God's actions as being good or bad. You just judge them as what they are. Yeah, you just accept them.
I don't judge them. You're right.
Okay. So you just take them at face value by fiat.
Right, that actually is a really good segue into the next section of this, because if we do take that as almost axiomatic, that anything God has done has to be good.
No, he's not saying that, though. Just to clarify, he's not saying that. He says he's taking that as a but whatever that he's not judging it as good. He's just saying it is what it is.
Right, not judging it as good, accepting it as good, because it's axiomatic that anything God would do due to his nature is good. So there's no judgment there; it's an acceptance. That am I being correct?
No, I think you're correct. Yes. It's really hard to define good. It is, and I'm just going to go as a working thing. Right.
I mean, as a Ventilian presuppositionalist, I tend to shy away from the words axiomatic because I say that things are necessary presuppositions. But I understand where you're coming from, and I'm willing to accept that term for the purpose of this discussion.
Under the theology I understand from Christianity, what is good is the submission or the acquiescence to God's will.
Yeah, I've heard that as well. I definitely have heard that particular posited.
It's a very Catholic view.
Yeah. So that's why I was kind of asking, what people mean by good.
Okay, well, so anyhow, then we can move on, I think, to the next deal, because we're all on the same page still.
Yeah.
And the next level of this is since we established in the beginning that this is all part of God's plan, and as you know, where Cy was getting to as far as when we were talking about compatibilism versus Molinism, is that God has determined our roles. God has determined what we're going to do, and even though we still have the ability to choose, those choices are preordained, at least at a certain level, from God. Which would indicate if all of this is contrivance from God, including the starvation that's going on, the rape, the murder, all of this is was pre-known and part of God's design, part of God's will. As horrific as it was to know that it was the absolute best possible action for God to come down and literally kill that newborn, I think that leads us to the point where we have to accept that all the atrocities that are happening in this world, as much as we may not like it, they're at the same level. And the ability for us to understand that is beyond us, in the same way that you tell a child not to do something and they may not understand, why can't I do that now? They don't have the cognitive ability to understand the ramifications of their actions. We, as, for lack of a better term, lowly humans, cannot think at the same level as God, and therefore we may not understand that these things that seem atrocious to us are in fact something that will bring about the greatest of all good, and therefore I would say fit the definition of good. Would that?
Ooh, that's an interesting argument.
But
Can I simplify it a little bit? Go ahead.
Well,
Well, hold on, Nate. I just want to say, see you later, Ocean.
Oh yeah, I'm taking off. It's just,
to simplify it, the easiest analogy that I know of on this, to simplify it to everybody, is if I take my 8-year-old to get a flu shot this year. Now, my 8-year-old may know, but let's say when he was 5, all he saw when the doctor pulled out the needle was an evil person about to cause him pain, and there's no explaining that I can do, no rationalization I can do with his mind at that state of development to make him understand that this pain is actually a good thing. That's something that he needs to do to better himself. We as humans could be in that same situation underneath God's umbrella, in that the starvation that's going on, the rape, the murder, all of these things that we look at as horrific are in fact the greatest of all goods, because as we talked about earlier, God is incapable of doing anything that is not good. He has to do things that are good. And if his plan is his plan from an omni being, it must be, for lack of a better term, like dominoes.
Well, hold on. Ned, I just have just a simple objection, and the objection is that you kind of have like a dual layered approach here going on, in sense of when God does a particular action, we say it's all good, but then you've went to the individual human being and said when they do something, then by consequences God is kind of allowing them to do it or set up the circumstances around it. Then that rape or whatever you're saying would also in turn be good, but then. In that argument, then you made a consequentialist argument by saying, well, since the outcomes may be good, further down, we don't know what the outcomes is, then the overall outcome, then we're saying everything is also good. So I'm trying to just understand at the level of God.
It's not a consequentialist in that we have to sprinkle in some quote unquote evil actions to obtain the good. No, that rape was by definition a good, because it was the only action that could bring to fruition the ultimate of all goods, of all plans. So I'm not saying that. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, so this argument, your argument is an ends argument, because the ends are ultimate good. Then the means doesn't really matter, because all the means would be good. But I would disagree with that. I think you could have foul means, but then have good ends.
Not with an omni God, not with an omni good God. Because God cannot act in an evil way. God cannot lie. God cannot, God is all good. So if you're going to posit an omni-good God, that avenue, that ability to use quote unquote evil or to act in an evil way is not available.
But Ned, I think Nate's kind of right on this, though. It does sound like you're appealing to a consequentialist type approach rather than deological, saying that God has made these laws, we have to abide by them. Deontologically, I'm fine with that. But as soon as you start saying what's for the greater good, you are taking more of a utility or a consequentialist approach, aren't you?
Yeah, can I interject for just 1 second? It sounds to me like the fallacy of composition. And
I was thinking that too.
One of the best examples I've heard is if you pick up a Lego brick and you say this Lego brick is light, and then you go to a mall where they've made the Statue of Liberty out of 1 million Lego bricks, and you say, well, because this Lego brick is light, therefore that Statue of Liberty must also be light because it's made up of all these things that were light. And that is the fallacy of composition.
Sure.
And I would say that would be the same thing. Just because there are things that were actually evil, and the reason I can call them evil is because God calls them evil.
So are you arguing more that you can have?
I can now tell size.
This is going to be a weird analogy, but
he's had Lego foot.
Hang on, it's kind of a weird analogy, but you're saying that somehow like there's local evils and local goods that compared to like delta, maxima, and minima, or that we can have things that are, if we look at it myopically and say in this particular instance it's good or it's evil rather than the big picture, because I think what's happening is that these things don't exist in a vacuum. Right? Morality doesn't exist in a vacuum. Is that the kind of argument you're making?
Another example, let's say you had a military commander who said, I have to take this hill. And they've done the mathematics to say, I will lose 5% of my men if I take this hill. So they take the hill, which is a very good thing. But losing 5% of the men is not a good thing. So I would,
yeah.
Okay, but what I'm saying, Sai, is I get that when you have a limited being. But when we established in the beginning that God is without bound, and his plan is coming, every part of this existence is part of God's plan. I'm not understanding how on one hand you can say that God is all good, but on the other hand, through his plan, not only does he allow, but mandate evil occur. Can you kind of ferret that out for me a little bit? Because
according to the compatibilist view, we would say that God uses secondary means. God is not culpable for the evil that happens. So whatever evil does happen, although God uses it for the greater good, he is not himself culpable for it. He does it. And one of the examples that I bring up in scripture, because that has to be my guide. And I say, well, of course, the most evil act, you would say probably in the history of mankind, is Judas's betrayal of Jesus Christ. Did God plan that? Yes, he did. Acts 2:23 will go according to his plan and foreknowledge. Was Judas responsible for what he did? Matthew 26:24. It will go as it has been written, but woe to the man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better if he had not been born. He was responsible. Responsibility implies free choice. So we have an issue here. God planned it and he chose to do it freely. And the only way that can be biblically reconciled is that God planned the free choices. And just let me finish. So we go back to Genesis 50. Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery. And Joseph's brothers said, they go there. Joseph says, hey, I'm your brother. They think he's going to kill him. And he doesn't kill him because the father's still alive. That's what they figure. But later on in Genesis, in chapter 50, the brothers show up again. And now they're terrified that Joseph's going to kill them because their father's dead. And Joseph says, am I in the place of God? You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Now, the question that I would ask someone like SJ is, how can God mean an evil act? The only way he can mean an evil act is he means that people do it freely. And that's the compatibilist view, that there are actual evil things that happen that God intends for the greater good.
And the question is did God, for going back to the author analogy, did he script it to occur that way? Because I would assume that being omni, if there was a better avenue or a more, well, let's just use that term, a better avenue to get the same result, being all good, it almost puts him into a determinist position, and he would have had to use that route.
Yeah, I don't like dealing with hypotheticals with God, because I think there are no what ifs with God. However, this is one of those instances where I would bring up the book analogy. I would say that person, let's say you write a book about a killer. That killer is not looking over his shoulder and wondering what the author is going to have him do next. Now, I think it's problematic because the book is fictional. That's where the analogy breaks down. But I would say in our limited ability to grasp something like this is something that we might not even be able to grasp, but that God is the author of the book and we are free agents within that book.
And that's my exact point, is that if God doesn't, again, going to these hypotheticals with God, I'm right there with you. I don't like that. If God is there and God is as depicted in the Bible, and his plan is for the ultimate good, then there is no option. There is no plan B. He did things to the most efficient and the optimal way first time out. So you don't have to worry about any of these hypotheticals. Well, what couldn't he have done X, Y, and Z? No, he couldn't have, because this is the best way to get there. If that is the best way, go ahead.
No, but I mean, here's the question. Somebody asked me, was the crucifixion of Jesus Christ good? I would say yes, absolutely. It was the best thing ever. And if that person said to me, was the crucifixion of Jesus Christ evil? I would say yes, absolutely. It was the most wicked thing ever. So I would say both are true, but it would just depend on, the interpretation of that for the greater good or the actual. And yeah, can I get my mind around that? No, I probably can't. But I can define the crucifixion of Christ as a wicked thing, but I can also see that it was the best thing.
Or you could fall into more of a moral nihilist approach and take on error theory and think that, there is no real right or, good or bad or anything. But real quick, let me, if you don't mind, Nick, Dave S., jump in. I know he doesn't have very long and he wants to kind of ask about something that you guys were talking about. By the way, do you know Dave?
Let me get one sentence just real quick. And Sai, you can kind of think on this on the side. What this actually boils down to, in my opinion, is that every action must be good. Every action, if it's according to God's will and God's plan, is good. Therefore, it negates morality in that it negates any evil action whatsoever. So if you can kind of mull that over, then we can.
Yeah, no, but I would just say no. I could say that things are evil because God calls them evil. But I remember I had this discussion with somebody when I was in England a while back, and I said, what are you going to say to God when you stand before him? Should he let you in? He says, yeah, I'm a pretty good person. He says, I help an old lady across the street and I do all these things. And I say, you realize that if you do not do that to the glory of God, that what you're doing actually adds to your condemnation. So the fact is, me helping an old lady across the street, since I do it for the glory of God, is a good thing. And I would say that person doing it is a good thing, but it does not make them good. So, if it's done to the glory of God by his will, by his command, and his nature, then it is necessarily good. Now, if somebody does it for another reason, that very same act would add to his condemnation, although to the world it might look like a good thing.
Well, but again, everything is to God's glory. So even the evil, I mean, it specifically says that in the Bible. So
right. However, it would be the intent of the individual, though.
But again, even intent.
Okay, so this fellow. So I'll give you this fellow. I said, so why is helping an old lady across the street good? And he says, well, it's good for that lady. It's good for society. What goes around comes around. And I said, do you know what you've done with every one of your definitions as to why that was good? You're saying not God, not God, not God. So that's what I'm saying, is that the intent of the individual is not for the glory of God. Ultimately it is, but it's that individual's intent which makes what he did actually add to his condemnation.
Well, this is exactly why this is exactly why I wanted the people to understand what they mean by good. And Druss was the only one that really gave a very cogent definition of good, because when you start having these ambiguities of what that word means, what does it mean to do the good, to something good? What does that actually mean? Because now we're like, in this instance, okay, yes, it's good, but in this way of looking at it, it's not good.
Yeah, we have a very objective way of good right now.
The thing that I think was Philo of Alexandria, not me. So,
but the thing that puzzles me is that I have absolutely no problem with that differentiation, zero. So I don't actually understand the problem with any kind of differentiation, because I look at his word and I see what he defines as good, what are good acts, what are evil. I have no problem with it. It's never been a question for me.
But it's a wholly subjective view based on your only interpretation of what you believe is good versus, because someone else could see the same events that you're saying and judge it not to be good. So it seems to be very cogent. No. That's why Steve was trying to get us to have a definition, so we all work on like an objective
there's some
understanding of what we're talking about.
Yes, of course.
Well, I think that's what people will be accountable for when they stand before God, is whether they took him at his word or whether there's some kind of bias or prejudice is entered into their interpretation. To, like there are people who will define certain acts that they happen, their pet sin, and they'll look at scripture and they'll try and make it agree with their pet sin. And I say, if you want to take that and stand before God with that position, I wouldn't advise it.
And again, I have to stay side with side. He's absolutely right. Even that intent that he's saying that was, quote unquote, I don't think we would agree with. He would agree with me, is a good, but God prescribed that intent to occur within his narrative, within his plan. Therefore, that is a good. Even the intent against God is a good thing, because it has to be.
I see the way you're looking at it. Yeah, I mean, granted, I think the way of, I don't want to like change your argument, but the only reason your argument seems to make a little bit more sense than the generic person is because in this particular case, God is omnipotent, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, you nailed it right there.
Yeah,
right. And that's one of the things that I make very clear in the very beginning. This argument is constrained to a very select type of believer. They have to agree with at least the omniscience. The omniscience is mandatory, and then you can either go with that omniscient God is all good or all evil, because kind of fun. It's funny if God's plan was all evil, it would work the same way. But they have to, those foundational issues, those beliefs must be part of this, or it's not applicable in any way.
Yeah, but once you go down the path of omnibenevolent, omniscient, and omnipowerful, the problem you run into is the logical problem of evil at that point, because then you have an inconsistent system. Because
no. See, that's the thing, is it's not a problem of evil, because there's no such thing as evil. That's the whole crux of the argument.
Using your argument, there's no evil in that particular system.
Well, no, this is the whole point of Ned's argument, is because what you're doing, and which is why I gave the definition of good that I did. The whole point of Ned's argument is when we're discussing this concept of good, for Cy, we have to do it from his worldview, which is why I gave the definition of good that I did, rather than the definition of good that I hold for myself. I am doing him the courtesy of stepping into his worldview.
Yeah, no,
that's right, because the definition of good is too broad. Like when people say, "Are people free?" That definition.
I don't even know if it can be defined. I'm not convinced that good can be defined in any way.
No, but the thing is, you and I both would agree. What is good and what is bad, based. I would say
normatively, yeah.
What God has written upon our hearts. So, yeah, I would say that the definition of good, because like I say, if you ask me, was the crucifixion of Jesus good? I could say yes, and it could be a perfectly good answer.
Salvation for the world.
Was the crucifixion of Jesus bad? I would say yes, it was evil.
As long as we come from a moral non-naturalist approach, I'm okay with that, because I don't agree with moral naturalism. But moral non-naturalism makes a lot more sense to me as far as when it comes to the good.
But can I say one thing? No, but that doesn't really matter. Like our definition of good doesn't really matter, because if we're talking about an omnipotent God and defining whatever he does as good, then no matter what we call it, whatever happens is good. So I think Ned's argument is correct in the sense of
it's pretty sound. I mean,
the definition doesn't matter.
Okay, and I guess the question is Sai, you were saying that you've got the same action, let's say the crucifixion. How do you define that as evil? I don't see how you can get there.
Because it was murder, and God says murder is wrong; it's evil. So I can say that.
And it was who was murdered as well.
Well, right. But here's the thing. I mean, I think there's a very strong argument for saying the hero of the Bible is not Jesus, but would actually.
Okay, yeah, I got it.
Well,
the Romans.
The
Romans.
Yeah.
Well, it could be. I mean, it could be the Roman, but is Judas.
Yeah.
The only reason that all that happened was because of Judas and him selling out Jesus, so to speak. But anyway, getting back to that the question is that if the crucifixion needed to happen, was necessary to bring apart God's will, God's plan, then if we act in a way that is in reflection of God's will, and God defines evil as going against his will, well, his will was for that to take place. Being an omni being, he could not have willed anything else to happen, or it would have happened. And therefore, the people that acted in the way that they acted was congruent to God's will. It was not in opposition.
Well, no, you have to differentiate between the prescriptive will and the decretive will of God. And I would encourage you to look up that essay. I believe it's called The Two Wills of God, because there are things that God prescribes, like I say, thou shalt not murder, and he yet decrees that some people freely murder. So there are the two wills of God. So sorry.
Well, couldn't, and I guess the other question here is when God is using the prescribed will, could he not be using that in the same way that I tell my son when he's getting that shot, you need to sit still? And he's like, Dad, if I sit still, I'm going to get a shot and it's going to hurt. I understand that, but I, for lack of a better term, am prescribing that you sit still for your betterment. He has no understanding of why that ought happen, why he ought sit still. In the same way, when God prescribes that we ought not kill, we don't understand why we ought not kill. And it's not necessarily, well, we know that the action of killing in itself is wrong. In fact, I would even say murder is wrong. But God has to use those, again, because he's dealing, for lack of a better term, with a 5-year-old. We cannot glean what God's intent is, and therefore he must prescribe these kind of stopgap laws, if you will, to facilitate that his will is attributed or maintained.
Well, I would say we can determine that from his word. So, I mean, if I want to know if something is good or not, that's where I would go. I would go to his word. But I'm just wondering, are you consistent with this theory that you are espousing, or what is your standard at? I don't want to turn it into a debate, but it's interesting to posit something like this. But nobody lives like that.
Oh, you mean? Well, no. That's my problem. That's one of my biggest problems with Christianity, is that when I try to follow this out to where it leads, we end up in these type of, at least in my opinion, insurmountable problems. In that we have now literally, and just to kind of cut to the chase and cut to the end, I look at morality as kind of a 3-legged stool, and without any of the legs, it falls out. One, morality has to be able to exist within the realm that you exist in. There has to be an ability to have good and evil. Well, this first part of Nome, I think, at least in part, demonstrate there's no such thing as evil anymore. Morality cannot exist with an omni-God, at least an omni-God with a good plan that's in place. But secondarily, that the players in that reality must be able to determine what is good and evil, and that's a second horn of Gnome. That we can walk through that one if we've got time. But it shows that from a Christian point of view, you cannot.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
tell what Gnome is.
Yeah, it's just that's my catchphrase for this argument. It's
okay. Let me just. I mean,
let me finish that real quick. Let me finish real quick.
Yeah, let me finish real quick.
So the second part shows that you cannot even determine what is good or evil, even if there was some way to say there was the existence of good and evil from a Christian perspective. And then the third is you have to be able to justify those decisions, which again, the third horn demonstrates that from a Christian perspective, there's no justification for even the actions that you're taking. So not only do you lose one of the legs, you lose all the legs from a Christian perspective. With a question, and I hate this term, but I got to use it, worldview.
I don't like it either.
I hate it.
I know.
But morality,
I don't like the term.
Yeah, given the existence of an omni-God, morality literally implodes within on itself. So, I mean, that's where it all leads to. But again, we're almost through the first horn is where we're at right now, trying to demonstrate that I don't see how you can define anything as evil as long as God is aware of it, prescribed it, and or allowed it to take place in his world, because that means he meant it to happen. And given the attributes of an all-powerful, all-good being, he could not allow something to take place that was evil. You said it before. God cannot do evil acts. So there's no evil because he both allows it and, well, he not only allowed it, he constructed every part of this reality. It's all good. It has to be.
Let me just see if I understand this correctly and say if this is, because I like to dumb things down to my level. But let's say you as a professed atheist go to a Christian woman who's standing there with her 3-year-old daughter, and you murder that girl. And that woman says to you, how dare you do such an evil thing? And you say, no, it's part of God's plan, so it was good. Is that right? Yeah, okay, well, that's absurd.
Well, wait a second, Asai. If, let's say that somehow I had direct revelation from God that child, for whatever reason, needed to be killed. One step removed from what was done to Isaac. If God mandated I go and kill that child, and I killed that child, now again, the mother is not going to understand it any more than Isaac understood it when his father was standing over him with a knife. But it's still
that's consistent.
An ultimate good, correct?
Well, the problem is I'm a cessationist. I say God does not reveal himself in that way anymore. So I would disagree with that. I would say
let's say that he was. Let's say that good. That's
exactly that. You're moving the goalposts.
Yeah. No. If you're going to argue with somebody who has my worldview, then that's my position. If you want to get somebody who's a continuationist in here, then fine. But it's not a problem for my worldview.
No, we agree.
Again, we agree. It's not that God would do it. I'm saying that I'm assuming God could do it. He's only choosing not to. Therefore, if he decided for whatever reason, not even that, it was prescribed in his will from the beginning that he would come to you, me, whoever, and mandate that we kill this infant on the street corner. That's part of his will. Would that not, in fact, be part of God's will and therefore a good action?
Well, again, I say it's an impossible hypothetical because I'm saying because then God would be denying himself, and he cannot deny himself. Then he would be saying his word is both true and false, and that cannot be the case.
Okay, but again, it's not. We don't need to get into the minutia of this. All I'm asking is could an action, if mandated by God, or not could, would by definition any action mandated by God be a good action?
If it was the case.
It would be an ultimate good, of course. I mean,
okay,
that's been the case.
Then again, as much as the pain that lady would suffer,
you're right, Nick.
As much as the pain that I would suffer by having to carry out that act. If God mandates it, it is an ultimate of good.
Okay, now here's the question: would you be good for doing it?
Did I follow God's will?
Would you be good for doing it?
by definition, if it was God's will,
Okay,
yes.
so was Judas good for what he did to Jesus?
Absolutely. It's part of God's will.
Well, wait a minute. Well, Judas wasn't commanded by God to do that, though.
No. Wait. Let's be clear here. Again, if everything is part of God's
plan, I agree with you, Ned.
I'm talking as much to Sai as I am to you. If everything is part of God's prescribed will, God's plan, this prescription, this script, so to speak, if Judas's role within that narrative was to do what he did, and that was
I think you're making a mistake. Not everything is according to his prescribed plan. Everything is according to his decreed plan. God does prescribe things, but he decrees that people freely do evil things.
Okay, but again, if God, and I mean, this is where I'm really confused. I hope I don't come across as combative in saying that you're wrong.
Fine.
I'm asking more than telling.
No, but you have to understand, though, there is no such thing as wrong either. So you can't even say that my argument is wrong, because then you could translate this evil argument to right and wrong as well.
Yeah, again, I'm not going to contest that, because
but the thing is, nobody lives like that, because we all know good from evil. So I think
and that's the exact point of Gnome, is that even though when it logically follows, it gets us to this point that is an untenable position.
I have no
for lack
problem.
of a better term.
I have no problem with it. I have absolutely zero problem differentiating the greater good from God's decreed things that are evil in Scripture. I have no problem with that. I don't understand why somebody would say that there is a problem with that. I don't see any problem with that. I've never been wondering whether it might be right to murder somebody, because I know that God says murder is wrong. It's evil. I've never had a problem with that. So I don't see it as an issue. I think that's, if people want to go on.
Where the issue seems to lie, and I'm going to use a term, I don't mean it combatively or negative. It's just, I don't know. I'm not eloquent enough to find a better description. What it seems to me is you're ignoring the fact that all of these evils, at least the perceived evils from the human perspective, instead of acknowledging that those are not in fact evils because they're part of God's narrative, they're part of God's will, God is aware of them. Not only was God aware of them, but he literally mandated they would occur because his will was put into place from.
Well, let me ask you this question. Does God call those things evil?
Again, I would argue that if those are labeled as an evil, God is using that as the same way as me using some method to try to convey to my child that doesn't have the ability to understand they need to get an inoculation, that this isn't good.
But you don't convey that to your child. You say it's a good thing. God doesn't say that. God mandates that certain things that happen according to his plan were evil. God clearly states that in his word, that things are evil. So I take him at his word.
Okay, well then I'll use it. Wait a second. I'll use a real world example. My son being 8, I run 3 or 4 times a week. My son started running with me this summer. And again, he can't run very fast, but he had never been, he didn't understand that it hurts when you run. So in the same way that I say, look, you've got to run, it's going to hurt. You're right. You're going to get out of breath. Your muscles are going to hurt. You're going to be winded, whatever. And that is bad. That's bad. Sorry. That's how it is. If you want to run, that's how it is. In the same way, God could be saying, look, this is evil, but we want to have the greatest of all good. I'm going to use that placeholder word or that placeholder concept of evil to allow you to know that this pain must be endured in order to bring about the greatest of all goods. I don't have a choice any more than I would argue God has a choice to allow my son to be able to run a 5K without the pain that he must endure. God doesn't have a choice but to allow or mandate the evil occur in order to get to the greatest of all goods. It's still all good, no matter what label you put on it. It's just a placeholder and an explanation for us lowly human beings that don't have the ability to comprehend on God's level.
Because you don't have the epistemic vantage point he has. But we only have about 30 minutes or so, because we have a Patreon event that we have to do for our Patreons. However, we can continue more, but I I want to get Dave Essen real quick. I know he doesn't have much time.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I totally forgot.
It's okay.
Yeah, I forgot about that. Go ahead, Dave. Go ahead, Dave.
I'm going to be having another hangout later on tonight, Ned, if you're available. I do want to talk about Cosmic Skeptic and his seemingly, to me, not coherent framework from when he's coming from, and I wanted to run it by you. So I don't know if you have time tonight, but I'll be doing it tonight because I just really want to get out of the way, and I want to talk about cognitive positions, but non-cognitive positions.
And if you could, Steve, if you could just link me that whatever conversation you had or whatever that you're basing that off of, I'll review that before I come on tonight. And
okay, it's a whole bunch of different things from various videos, but I can give you a summation and then link you. Okay. But anyways, Dave S, my friend, Mazel Tov, Shalom.
I didn't want to derail because there was a lot of things there that I could have brought up that I'm going to let slide because I didn't want to derail it if we were talking about.
Yeah, morality. No, I have to get going soon as well. Actually, I just popped in for a minute, but I would say that when God defines something as evil, I don't think that we need a philosophy degree to determine whether or not this is actually evil or whether it's. I think that God speaks plainly in Scripture what is good and what is evil, and I just don't think. I think it's interesting to philosophize about stuff like this.
No,
but
I agree with you. I agree with you on that. I think instinctually we know we have. It's like I think more the way Moore I think describes it is I can tell you about the color yellow, but doesn't mean that I can really explain to you what yellow is if you don't have eyes to know what color yellow is. Right? Morals are a lot the same way. Good and evil is a lot the same way. We have an understanding what these are, but they're very difficult to explain in any concrete type of terminology, because if you're a blind man, how do you describe the word color? But we all know what we mean by color and yellow and things like that. So we know we could talk about good and we can say this is good, this is bad on a normative level. I think that's just fine. And you're right. It's only when you get into some of the more deeper philosophical aspects of it is there some nuance to it. But overall, I agree with you, Si. I don't think you have to have a philosophical degree to say, look, murder is wrong, rape is wrong, these things are wrong from a normative point of view. You don't have to explain yourself which ethical theory you're appealing to or anything like that. I agree with you wholeheartedly about that if that's what you're trying to say.
And what might be and side, just so you know, that's where the second horn picks up as far as being able to determine, if we moved on and I said I grant somehow evil does exist, now how can we suss out what is good versus evil? That's what the second horn does, because it demonstrates that even if you are right and there is literally evil actions, I don't think you have the ability to determine, unlike Steve, I don't think you can determine when killing is murder, when rape is bad. There's just, and again, it's another 20 minutes, so I don't want to derail the conversation.
You don't have to take my word for it, but that issue has never come up for me. I've always recognized when murder was bad and when rape was bad.
No, I agree with
that's what might be interesting, is if you've never been confronted with that, then that'd be interesting to see.
I've never had to puzzle whether a rape might have been good or a murder might have been good. I've never had to puzzle that.
Only philosophers.
That's what I'm saying. It would be fun. It would be fun, because in the same way, when this stuff comes up, it's like, oh, how do I get by that? Well, so that's the fun part of this stuff.
Let me ask you guys while I got you all here. Then Josh wants to talk about something real quick. But since I asked you, everybody has their own meta-ethical and normative positions, and it's very complicated to keep track of everybody. Does everybody in here right now, can they consider themselves to be a cognitivist? Do you think moral propositions actually express moral beliefs? Yes?
I think for me, I boil it down to even more. I'm a bit like, I have to say, I kind of relate to Asai on this. I think we make it much more complicated than it needs to be. I just hold that people are responsible for their action and for their inaction.
No, I totally agree.
And I think you can take it to a more complex level.
I totally agree. I just want to know who's a cognitivist and who's a non-cog, because I'm going to have a discussion tonight, and I'd like to find some non-cogs to come in, and they're very far and few between. So I was just wondering if
I think you have to know what you're doing. I think you can put yourselves in situations where you don't know what you're doing, but
I just want to know. I just want to know if you're cognitive.
I would say more cognitive.
You're more cognitivist. Okay, yeah. I'm a moral cognitivist as well, but I'm trying to find some moral non-cognitivists. So
yeah, like you said, I think you're going to be hard pressed to find someone who will come down on that side of it, Steve.
Well, they're hard to find. So
absolutely.
But a non-cognitivist would say that they're not truth path propositions, so therefore, if they have no truth value assigned to them or can be assigned to them, they don't actually express moral beliefs.
Yep, but Steve, things change because 20 years ago there were hardly any flat earthers.
You know what's interesting? That could actually be an offshoot of this argument, because I think you could lead yourself into that position. Now that I think of it.
Well, I mean, there's a couple different ways you can look at non-cog. You can be an expressivist, or not expressivist, a prescriptionist, or an emotivist, and a few other things. But, anyways, we'll have that discussion later on tonight if you want to join. Because what I'm finding cosmic skeptics seemingly argues for subjectivity, right? I mean, he seems to be a moral subjectivist, right? That's what he talks about a lot. Yet he told me in an email, and this is not private stuff, this is public stuff, because he's also said it online, that he also holds to moral non-cognitivism, especially he tends to emotivism. Emotivism is not a non-cog position, so how can he be a moral subjectivist? They're incompatible with each other as far as I can see. And I've asked on the Great Debate Computing if there's anybody that can reconcile this, please let me know, because I don't know how you reconcile a moral non-cognitivist position with an ethical subjectivist position. They're completely different. One accepts there's moral propositions that are expressing beliefs, and the other one doesn't. They're diametrically opposite. Am I overlooking something here?
I'd say you're.
Yeah, I mean, so far
I've
asked a lot of people, and they're like, I don't know how he's reconciling this either. But I'm going to be having a conversation with Cosmic soon, and I just want to get my ducks in a row and to steel man him as much as possible. I don't want to straw man him at all. But we'll talk about that later. So,
that's absolutely the greatest position is steel man, and that's what I'm absolutely an advocate of that, and that's what I try to do here. So.
Yeah, and that's the best discussions. I'm telling you, I get tired of being straw man. It happens a lot on Twitter. When people straw man me, I'm like, why am I wasting my time? Because I'll go out of my way to make sure I'm not straw manning something. I will take your best interpretation of something to steel man them, and I don't get that in return a lot, and it bugs me. But anyways, Josh, why don't you talk about what you want to talk about so we can wrap it up? Si, you got to go. Appreciate you dropping in. Do me a favor when you get a chance. I know you talked to Eric. We want to have a conversation with Eric again. He's been on twice already, but I think we left off with a bunch of stuff. And have him come on.
Sorry.
I also want to talk to him about his. He's doing stuff with his students where he will have them ask questions to the atheist, right? And I think we could probably work out a lot of good things with that. He wants to kind of have people at a specific time to talk to his students. But anyways, could you talk to Eric again and see when he's got some free time, and maybe we can arrange a hangout like this, because this is fun.
Sure. Now, of course, not Christians in the group that I'm aware of, but I belong to a relatively small church in Tillsonburg, Ontario. And one of the fellows, he was becoming a deacon. He was killed in an accident. He was on his motorcycle. He hit a vehicle head-on 2 days ago, and left a wife with 2 young girls and a baby that's due in November. So, that's been heavy on my heart. And, this topic actually about morality and about, God's decree and stuff like that. Like, ultimately, this was for her good, because that's what Scripture says, that God works all things for the good of those who love him. But it's a very difficult time. So I appreciate the demeanor of you guys. And
very sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I appreciate the demeanor of you guys. And like I say, I'm concerned for the salvation of the people that I engage. And I appreciate the discussion. And looking forward to the next time we can do
Likewise. We always like having you on. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely, Si. And again, thank you very much for answering my questions. I mean, this was I really enjoyed this, and anytime you want to get together, I'd love to discuss more.
Sounds good. I'm not a philosopher. I just answer to the best of my ability, and I hope to be God honoring when I do it. And thanks a lot, guys.
All right, hit me up via DM on that.
In all seriousness, all the best to your friends, family.
Thank you.
Being a biker,
absolutely.
Likewise. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Josh.
Yes. Hi.
Okay. Do you want to clarify one of your positions from their? This was the after show to that discussion, and we didn't talk anything about it. Beginning we did.
Well,
I know, Brand. I know.
Well, I noticed that the first one I came in, a certain Ocean was accusing me of historical revisionism. There are a number of historians, including at Stanford University, Neil Ferguson, who has written a number of books, number of great books. He used to teach at Harvard. This is one of the most prominent historians. You see him all the time on the news. Neil Ferguson, Victor Davis Hanson, who wrote Carnage and Culture, who I like. is all three, but I have a book right here, How the West Was Won by Rodney Stark. Him and other scholars show that there are certain things in history that shows why the West did start to dominate the rest by the year 1500. And I was talking about, I don't think I got to European exploration, but you often hear about these things like well, let me just mention a few, like the Egyptian pyramids or the Hanging Gardens of Babylon or the Taj Mahal. All these were built to make their emperor, to make their king look good. There's something in Greece that happened about the 6th century BC. It's called the Greek miracle. And I want to read to you something by Edith Hamilton. This is what she writes. The Greeks were the first people in the world to play, and they played on a great scale. All over Greece, there were games, all sorts of games, athletic contests of every description, contests in music, where one side outsung the other, in dancing games, so many that one grows weary where the list goes. Wretched people, toiling people do not play. Nothing like the Greek games is conceivable in Egypt or Mesopotamia. Play died when Greece died, and many a century play passed before it was reassured. You probably have heard, this is the last point, you probably have heard of the famous non-Christian philosopher Alfred White Northhead. Well, Alfred White Northhead was best friends with Bertrand Russell. And this is what Alfred White Northhead said. And it really surprised Bertrand Russell when they were at this conference way back when. Faith, he says, faith in the possibility of science derived from medieval theology. He goes on to say that this did not happen in Asia or anywhere else. And he specifically talks about something I talked about earlier, the Ming Dynasty, how Chonghe in 1410, all the boats and everything was destroyed because they didn't have an idea of progress like the Greeks did. So I'm very supportive of this Greek idea.
Chonghe, you're talking about 12th, 13th century?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, Chonghe, you're talking about 12th, 13th century China? So I'm just trying to put a bit
I'm talking about dynasty in the early 15th century.
What does all this have to do with
I'm not really sure where this is leading to, but let me.
What I'm trying to say is science originated in the West.
Okay, we get that. Let's how about this, Josh? How about this? Let's say arguendo. Everything we know now is completely because of Christians. Everything, all science, math. Let's just give you everything. I'll still man the hell out of it. I'll give you everything and grant it. What's the argument? So what? We live in 2018 now. If everybody today was a complete atheist, it wouldn't change anything about what we know. That knowledge is there.
I thought about that.
Can you unhide Ocean, Steve? I think he wants to comment.
Can I do what?
Can you unhide Ocean? He's back.
When we were
oh shit, sorry. Go ahead, Josh.
When we were all talking, I thought of that, and my answer is, what if I didn't teach my students where virtue comes from? What our country was built on?
Where does virtue come from?
On virtue.
Are you a virtue ethicist?
No, yes, by the way, I am. This is what our early founders were. They believed in God. They weren't deists. And I have a whole bunch of quotes. I can even go back to Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin. Benjamin Franklin was more on the deist side. But other than that, there's not many others. That most of them, like Benjamin Rush and Jonathan Witherspoon, educated so many congressmen, him and Thomas Reed, so many elected representatives, James Madison, our 5th president, so many people comes from this school of common sense realism, not this skeptical approach.
Ocean, you take this because I'm trying to be as open minded as possible because I think
I'm trying to figure out what he's arguing for.
Yeah, exactly. I look at open mindedness is an epistemic virtue, and I'm trying.
I have
to
a small problem
like
with what he said, like from a historical perspective, that like it's hard to explain things like the Jeffersonian Bible with the kind of things that you're saying about the founding fathers or Jefferson specifically. But
I'm here now. I heard you talking about me earlier.
Yes, and I stand by all of it. But I'm trying to figure out what you're actually arguing for right now.
You've been chastising where I went to school. For
Yes,
one of my
absolutely. I chastise Liberty University. it's if you listen to my wording, it's I believe that Liberty University is definitely slanted, but I also think that you've somehow graduated from it with a degree in history, right? That's what you were studying at the time,
yes.
Right? So I'm confused as to how you hold a lot of opinions that you do with a history degree. I also hold a history degree, so that's the reason why I'm surprised.
Okay. I didn't learn any of it from Liberty University. I did a lot of outside research. This is how I think most of us learn. I had so many disagreeing views of liberty, but that was only one part of my life. I've since went to graduate school at different places and have a graduate degree.
That's cool. But it seems that your study of history, like the way that you look at history, is very, very odd. So but as far as like what you're in here arguing about, like arguing for, I don't know what you're trying to bring as the point when you're talking about things like the greatness of Christianity.
I don't think it's the historical revisionism as you try to label me. I think it's a number of these scholars, and I'm pointing specifically to Neil Ferguson and Victor Davis Hanson. These are legitimate scholars who see these threads, these definite threads from the Greeks and from the Romans. They did a lot of great things. We are a product of not just Christian history, but all this amalgamation of the Greeks and Romans. I think Europe has the best of what the Greeks and Romans did. In a lot of other cultures too, like you brought up Persia, certainly so. There's a lot of stuff that was going on, but by the year 1500, things started to change. And
you're saying that's because of Christianity, despite the presence of Christianity for 1,000 years prior?
Well, I think you have to be humble enough to look at Christianity and church history played a significant factor during these centuries. So once you get to 1500, you see an escalation of things like, for example, European exploration.
Right. So I'm going to try and get to the point about what you're actually arguing for, because we can get into like the minor disagreements and jumping all over the history of Europe as far as what contributions that Christianity made. And actually, if you, I don't know if you recall very much of our conversations in the past, but I am fairly charitable to Christian history in Europe as far as like the preservation of knowledge that it contributed to European history. There's a lot of I'm not one of those guys that's like, well, Christianity is the cause of the fall of the Roman Empire and the reason why we had this like this arena of destitute in Western Europe for a long time. Get people like that.
Yeah, if it wasn't the Victorians, would have nothing.
Exactly. So
we're gonna have to wrap this up.
That all aside, that's the reason why I'm trying to get to the fucking point rather than get into like the nitty gritty.
I know.
Like what is the point that you're arguing for with all of this stuff?
Before we go, let me just summarize what I think. I think to progress to tomorrow, and this is how I teach my students, that we need not forget. So look, I'm saying this because my students come into class with not the historical background that we had, and they're losing something.
You know what would be a good argument?
Steve, if you don't mind, I want to. You're saying all of these things about Christianity for a reason, I assume. Are you thinking that the historical narrative of Christianity as you're framing it is such that it helps with the truth value of Christianity in some way, or are you making some other point?
Oh, my point is I think probably atheists and all of us together, we need to probably pay a lot more gratitude for the property rights, for the liberties that we have that have evolved over thousands of years and were really solidified through British thinkers and through European thinkers that were heavily influenced by this Christian ethos, this worldview.
The people going after Locke were Christian as well as like. All right, so Locke, we can have a discussion with Locke being like theologically like there's a theological basis for a lot of the things that he says, but the people going after him were Christians as well. He was exiled from Britain because of shit that he was saying by Christians. So to say that Christianity fostered that, and especially British history fostered that, I think is a little bit of a mischaracterization. Maybe I might say revisionist.
1689, the Glorious Revolution. You had a lot of turmoil in Britain. He wrote a defense of what Christianity is. We need not forget that.
Okay, but Josh, I just we have to
what I'm saying is that
guys, we have to wrap this up. I have to go.
Yeah,
okay,
I understand that.
Let's get to the crux of the matter real quick. Josh, yes or no?
I'm trying to find it.
I'm gonna do it right now. You know I'm good at this. Josh, here's the crux of the matter. Are you or are you not? It's a simple yes or no. Trying to make the argument that since Christianity has lended to things like schools and education and all these other things, all these positive things, that it lends credence to the truth value of Christianity. That's the crux of it. Is that what you're arguing?
It's more sophisticated than that.
No,
what's the sophistication?
It's really not.
Right.
It's really not.
I get frustrated with you saying that it's more sophisticated. I'm somebody who loves subtlety. I fucking revel in it.
And piece of shit.
But the problem that I have with what you're saying is that you're simply labeling sophistication, and then you're not explaining any of the damn sophistication. I am happy to like walk through with you step by step in order to get to the point that you're going to, but you need to start like elucidating it somehow rather than saying things that are just like have empty meaning. And then when somebody tries to ask you a question, go, no, it's more sophisticated than that. What's the sophistication? What are you actually driving towards?
For us to understand reality, all the facts that we see through our sight, between the spectrum of sight, 360 between 720 million microns, that we can discern wavelength wise. We have to look at something and decide what we're looking at based on the meaning, based on an interpretive framework. Throughout the centuries, we've got that interpretive framework through cultural innovations that the church and others have played, especially the Greeks and Romans, with the Greek miracle happening, where I read that quote from Edith Hamilton earlier. I could read other quotes.
And I would argue against that.
I don't care about quotes.
Again, I really want to reduce it down to an argument at a line of reasoning that's getting you to.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen
to a point that I still don't know what you're actually driving toward. Like what the problem that I'm having with the conversation right now at this point is I don't know how you're getting to where you're going nor where you're going.
Yeah, can I tell you this, Josh? No, wait, Josh, hang on a second. And let me read this real quick. Ken Hovind, CPA, super chat. Thank you. He says God is real and he plays for the quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs. Thank you, Ken Hovind, CPA. Josh, give me some suggestions because you're going to be around, obviously, probably on Hangouts. Hang on. This is what you should do. Practice this. This is how I would do my argument, right? You just say, look I am arguing this, and then give the reasons for it. Give a very succinct basal statement or two of what your argument entails, because everybody in here, everybody, including the live chat, has no idea what the frick you're trying to argue. That cannot be just coincidence. Because we have we are all the great debate community. We've done these things for years. Okay, we all are very good at having conversations.
Have you even heard of Neil Ferguson?
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
I think
guys, oh my God! I promise you. But let me. It doesn't matter whether or not we've heard of the things that you've heard about, or if you're miles ahead of us in degree and education. The problem is that if nobody knows what you're arguing for, or the route that you're actually getting to what you're arguing for, which is still a mystery, then no one's going to understand what you're saying, and you're going to get accusations of word salad, just as you're getting right now all over the fucking live chat and in here from me saying that you're not saying anything about it.
And then look, I'll give you an example. Look, if I started talking about nuclear reactors and things of that nature, and you had no idea what the hell terminology I'm using, I'm not conveying any information that's usable to help anybody understand anything, right? If I say, "Hey, ocean," I go into things like resonant escape probability. Do you have any freaking clue what that means? No.
Look, Josh,
my problem. Hold on. My problem is that
epistemological vantage point of doubting Christianity, because there's multiple layers to this, and we don't know.
Okay.
Any of these
simple question, Josh.
Serious.
What are you fighting
for? Know from history points to the truth of Christianity.
All right. What is?
Oh my God.
Okay, hang on.
Right, is that your thesis statement?
Ocean, you asked the question.
Is that your thesis statement?
Yes.
What are you fighting for?
What is your main goal? Are you trying to demonstrate the validity and the verticality of Christianity? Is that your goal?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm trying to.
That's not my goal.
You're saying that history then points to the truth value of Christianity.
And
then we can have a conversation about what's going on. That's what you're trying to gear toward.
Right. I think there's no argument to be had there, but I'd listen to it. I don't see a correlation between history and the veracity of a proposition. Right.
No, I now understand where he's arguing from, Steve. What he's arguing from. This is back to the synthesis theory and the synthesis writing of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century AD. Where you're starting to get the influence of Greek philosophy mixed with sort of Judaic tradition and early Christian philosophy. And this is the synthesis of Western thinking as he's describing it.
I've got to stop everybody real quick because I do have to go. I'm about to go to my aunts and do things. All right, see you later, Ocean.
I think that's where he's coming from.
Bye.
This is why we should stick with analytic philosophy. Okay. Anyways.
And Josh, just one thing. I think you're ignoring. I mean, you're wanting to posit that this somehow brings credence to Christianity, ignoring all the while that the very foundations of mathematics were done in the Middle East under. I would say in any way, shape, or form, non-Christian influence, namely algebra. So if you're going, if you're going to go down that road, then you're going to have to say that mathematics proves all the Abraham, all of. Go ahead.
Okay, I understand your argument, sir. Rodney Stark and others say that mathematics, pure and simple, is not empirical science. I'm not denying that the contributions from other cultures, especially the Arabs, but I will tell you this: in a lot of the societies that the Arabs conquered, they let Christians and Christian intellectuals run the administrative part of the locales that they were in. So if you
Christianity wasn't even in existence when most of this stuff was developed. Philosophy, if you're going to go back, Christianity did not exist with Plato.
This is the thing, Ned, is that there's a crossover between what he's talking about is that he will get mad at me for saying this because I've called him out on this shit before, where he's not only arguing for Christianity and its validity, but he's also arguing for a form of European supremacy. And
exactly. And that's my point.
He does it.
If you're going to do that all the time, ignoring all the influence and literally the cradle of philosophy and mathematics coming from the Far East or Middle East, sorry, it's absolutely incoherent and special pleading.
Is Joshua Europhile?
Let me talk.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, now I get it. Thank you.
Where the Christians got their philosophy was from the Greeks, and they got a lot of mathematics from there and a lot of other cultures.
Where did the Greeks get their mathematics?
That doesn't matter.
Why does that not matter? But it mattered. How? Wait a second. This is a serious question. Let me ask this. Why does that not matter? But everything. Wait a second, Josh. Why does that not matter? But everything that Christianity, quote unquote, contributed does matter somehow.
Christianity was the necessary and sufficient condition for the development.
This was before Christianity.
Apparently not, because Christianity was yet to exist.
Yeah. Here's the other part of the problem: is he winds up appropriating a bunch of polytheistic history and trying to suck it in to his medieval Christendom philosophy. and then try and appropriate it and say, no, I made this. You know that meme where it's like, where you have like ancient Greece builds philosophy and they hand it to Christianity, and like, I made this, and then Christianity sits there and look at it. I made this. This is mine. I'm going to take Aristotelian philosophy and I'm going to whack people over the head of it for the next 10 centuries. Like that's Trumpism. It's ridiculous.
Born on third, claiming they hit a triple.
Yeah, I don't get it either. I mean, I don't understand it. But
I understand where he's coming from, but I don't.
I do. No, yeah, I do understand.
Delineate it, guys. There was a plethora of societies that the ideas accumulated, which Christianity got. But to go to the next step, to make where experimental science, or where the first universities came about, this was a Christian belief in the progress of reason, that we can find an ordered universe and discover it, and that there are laws that we can apprehend.
So wait, okay, all right. Let me ask you something. So you're arguing that basically the uniformity of nature is a Christian concept, correct?
The discovery of it.
The discovery of it. How exactly, when you have an omni-God that literally performs miracles, that literally speaks into existence everything, that can let me finish, that can circumnavigate at will any quote-unquote law of nature, is there any way to substantiate uniformity of nature? Uniformity of nature is subjective by definition if God exists. There's no uniformity. There's no law.
See, I think that's a bad argument, because
explain it.
With the Chinese, well, I've never seen that argument in the literature.
That it's not in the literature. It's my argument. You're right. That's part of the new argument that I'm bringing up against presuppositionalism. Again, if you're going to claim that you have uniformity of nature, at the same time positing that everything is contingent on a being that is boundless, you cannot have both.
That's theological. That's theological. They used these common sense principles as, for example, Newtonian and Baconian science. I'm talking here about Francis Bacon, where you can observe something, you can observe the world and make inferences from it. Now, this did not happen. This trying to pinpoint the regularities of nature did not happen in China, not under the Ming Dynasty, and not before that. I teach.
Josh, the history lesson is interesting, but again, I would like you to address the point. You're in no way, shape, or form answering my question. I mean, I hope you think you are, but you're not. Giving me a history lesson of who did what doesn't tell me how you overcome this problem that I just put on the table.
Say it one more time. I really want to think about it.
Okay, the problem is this. You're claiming that we can do science due to the fact that we have uniformity of nature. Okay, yes. That's what you're claiming. Now, you're even going farther and saying the only reason that we know of it is because of Christianity. If you have an
only the Christians who discovered it. It took necessary theological principles to discover it.
But the problem is that is a false claim. You cannot have uniformity of nature with the existence of an omni-God that is boundless. That's a nonsensical proposition.
Guys, I got to wrap this up. We're gonna have a part 2 on this. I'll email you guys or message you guys when we're going to do this. But I'm going to have a hangout tonight on the Cosmic Skeptic thing. I'm just trying to get as much information as I can, and I'll ask people tonight about this argument. But anyways, I want to thank you guys. Ocean, always a pleasure. Ned, I'm glad you had a chance to talk to Sai. Josh, glad you came in to be able to put things back. And by the way, I want to ask you questions later on, Josh, about some of the things we're talking about, naturalistic God, because I talk a lot about atheism, even though I'm not an atheist, but I don't accept naturalistic God in the terms of a proposition of theism. So to say that, and I know Ocean and I actually disagree with this. This is like the one thing that me and Ocean don't agree on, is that I think he'd probably agree with you more on that. But anyways, we'll talk about that. Druss, always a pleasure.
I hear what he's presenting, but
yeah, I don't think it's exactly the way you do. But he does argue that if you believe in a figurehead, that the emperor, that's a god, and I just disagree, because that's not what we mean by theism.
Are you saying Brister's saying that, or I'm saying that?
No, Joshua says that. Although you've argued that the emperor would have been a naturalist.
I've argued that somebody who believes that the emperor is the god is not an atheist.
Yes, right, and I disagree. Right. But that's one of the very few things that when it comes to these topics that we don't see eye to eye on. Anyways, we'll finish this up later, guys. I do got a Patreon hangout, so if you're Patreon to Non Sequitur Show, I'll be right there, guys. Okay, so
No worries.
I gotta go.
Thanks a lot.
Good night, all.
Yeah,